His whole life, as I said, was one long home run. And now he has rounded the bases. One of the things I love most about black churches is referring to these services as homegoings. Do not forget that. You can hurt. You can miss him. He loved you more than life. That's a gift some people never feel, even for 5 minutes. May it sustain you. He is home. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah it is. And welcome, my friends, to another edition of SCLC Today TV. I'm Maynard Eaton, and of course, our president and CEO, Dr. Charles Steele Jr. Dr. Steele, what a day, what a homegoing, as President Clinton said, for a man who said to be on the Mount Rushmore of baseball, but many others say is also in the Hall of Fame of Civil Rights. I imagine you would agree with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And being from Mobile, Alabama, in the times that Mr. Aaron was being raised and going to high school, and what really motivates me is that he was not deterred. He continued to live out the fact and commit himself to, he wanted to be a baseball player. And I heard him say that he left home with $2, I think, in his pocket, going to Indianapolis to play with the Indianapolis Clowns. I remember as a young boy in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, out in Hope, a community in Tuscaloosa called Hope. My dad had carried me to see the Indianapolis Clowns. And man, that was some kind of moment for me to see all of those black athletes. And at that time, Tuscaloosa had the Hope Rockets, which was an outstanding Negro League baseball team in its own right. And you had the Birmingham Black Barons. And, in Atlanta, you had the Atlanta Crackers, which was the white team, but you had the Atlanta Black Crackers. I mean, man, I remember those days. And I'm just 35 years of age. You understand what I'm saying? Right. If you believe that, then we can talk about doing some business. But no, it's so pleasing to me to have the historicity of knowing that Mr. Aaron and others, but he led the way along with Jackie Robinson. And he said also that Jackie Robinson was his role model that really inspired him. And I think he mentioned something like, he would get $1 a day when he was with the Negro League for his expense, and got $200 a month, being that far away from home and playing ball. But he and one of the other ball players would take that $1 a day that each one of them got, and they would buy peanut butter and crackers, and that's how they ate. But guess what? He was committed to let nobody, no one, no racism, no hatred to turn him away or around from his goal. And that was to make it to the major league.
And ironically, as I understand it, he's the last remaining Negro League player to have played in the major leagues. And as President Bill Clinton said, look at all the men who didn't make it, all the star Negro League athletes who didn't make it, who were good enough to play in the major leagues, but were refused access to the leagues. I mean, there was a wealth of talent from the Negro Leagues that never made it to the major leagues, although now some of them have been admitted to the Hall of Fame just recently.
I think that's just a blessing in its own right, because I grew up wanting to be a baseball player. We all did. Played in the streets, played in the front yard. Everywhere we went, going to the store, we'll take time out. And we had sticks. We didn't have baseball bats. And somebody would get a tennis ball and throw, and we'll be trying to get it. But that night or that afternoon, we would go to the semi-pro baseball teams on Saturday and Sundays. Right after church, we would go see all of those great athletes. I mean, man, they were great. And they gave their heart and their life to being a baseball player. And many of them never made it to the minor, not a major league. But they played ball all day and all night. That was their space to get away from racism, to get away from poverty, to get away from the hatred attitudes of going to the store. When I remember when colored people, Negroes at the time, black folks could not buy a Coca-Cola. That was for white people. And you need to tell those stories. Dr. Bernard Lafayette and I was talking about that today. And as we talk about none other than the great leadership and icon of Henry Hank Aaron, I was at the service of none other than Dr. Lafayette's sister-in-law, Mrs. Lafayette, his wife, sister today, the life and picture that I have in my hand of Miss Ethel Bulls Ellsbury. And she was quite a lady in her own right. And my wife just loved her. So even though we had an icon that was funeralized today, there was also another legacy of a lady who was married, none other than Miss Ethel Bulls Ellsbury, who was married to a former Tuskegee Airman. And she traveled the world. Oh, yes, sir. That's right, man. And she traveled the world. Such a loving and beautiful family. And I'm just honored that I was there to help memorialize her today as well.
Dr. Steele, as you well know, all the hatred, the vitriol, the discrimination, the hatred that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. went through. Imagine what Hank Aaron went through, the letters, a box full of letters that he received every day because he was chasing Babe Ruth's record. But they say he never had any bitterness. That's
never
surprising
had
to you?
Let me tell you what an honor I had to be next to Mr. Hank Aaron and his lovely wife, Miss Billy Aaron. When at the funeral service, none other than a great contractor, builder himself, Mr. Herman Russell. I was at his funeral. And when I walked in the church, the usher said, lead him to Mr. and Mrs. Aaron down on the front row. I sat right next to Miss Billy Aaron, and Mr. Hank Aaron was sitting next to her. And when I sat there, because I've met them before, but not that close up at a funeral, before it got started, we had a chance to chat. And she looked over at Hank and she said, Hank, this is Charles Steele Jr. He's president of SCLC. And he reached his hand out and he said, keep up the good work, young man. And I understand you from Alabama. And that was it. That
meant the world to you, I imagine, didn't it? That meant the world to you.
Man. And for his wife to make a special reintroduction for me to just have that moment with not only with Mr. Aaron, but also Mrs. Aaron, and we sat there together through the funeral. That was a touching moment for me.
We could talk all night about his gifts, but one of the things he did that really touched my heart are the gifts he gave to young students. The money he gave away, the young students he sent to college, how he kept telling everybody to keep on swinging to win in life. But he put his money where his mouth is. Yeah.
Absolutely. His nonprofit, Chasing the Dream. And one other thing, as I studied him, grew up with him as when I was watching him on TV and knew the iconicness of him as people talked in the community. And when he was with the Milwaukee Braves. And they used to have on Tuesday nights, home run derby. And he was on every Tuesday night because he would win from the other competing major leaguers. It was called home run derby. And man, we were glued to the TV. It was black and white, but we were very excited to see Hank Aaron win all of those home run derbies. One thing that stands out in my mind as I was observing and researching his life, he told a story where when he was on the road and was threatening to break the record of Babe Ruth, he couldn't eat with the rest of the team because his life was being threatened. They had to bring his meals to his hotel room. He couldn't come
Which
out.
was not registered, and the room was not registered in his name. It was registered in a Jewish man's name, not in his name.
That's right. You got the story, my friend. That's right. It was not registered in his name. And he made no big deal over this. He went through this. I mean, just Dr. King and others went through it, but he made no big to do over it because he knew at the time he was doing what he had to do just to play his part and his role. And I like this, what he said along the way. He made the statement, he said, I don't want people to forget Babe Ruth. I just want them to remember Hank Aaron.
Yeah, right,
I thought that was real fair.
And he will be remembered, will he not?
He will.
Another civil rights line we will remember. And you mentioned Dr. Bernard Lafayette. He was at a news conference today, online news conference, saluting the release of a memoir by Reverend C.T. Vivian, a friend of yours, a friend of SCLC's. But it's a new memoir coming out about Reverend C.T. Vivian, written by Steve Pfeiffer. It's called It's in the Action. Now here's a man who's a scholar, book collector, now has his own book out.
Mr. Eden, I must compliment you no time. But his lovely daughter and family, Denise, Miss Denise, sent me through the mail a tie of none other than the Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian and a book entitled Black Power and the American Myth. Man, am I on cloud nine. That's how I got it. Yes, sir. And I received that a few days ago. And I want to thank the family, and particularly Denise, for allowing me to be awarded this type of tie and book coming from none other of another icon in his own right, Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian.
Well, Dr. Lafayette talked about how he and Vivian were comrades all through ever since Nashville, and how I didn't realize this. Their birthdays are one day apart, and how they were raised together one day apart. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Vivian, as you know, man, with yourself, to me, you were delegated by Dr. Vivian because when he and I was going over the future of SCLC and what the platform was, the first thing he said, I want Maynard to be right there with me in working with the media and PR. I said, you got it. You got it, Dr. Vivian, because he served as president. And as Dr. Lafayette was saying today, and CT and I talked about it, he said, let me be the gap. And Charles, when you come back, I'll be here. And I came back with the approval of Dr. C.T. Vivian and the chairman of the board, who brought up the suggestion that he wanted Dr. Vivian and myself to be there working side by side, office next to each other. And I came back as CEO, and Dr. Vivian was president. Man, what a time, what a story to convey to my grandchildren and the rest of young folks coming behind us, because C.T. Vivian was one of the best storytellers that you would ever encounter in your life. I went in there at 10 o'clock in the morning, then come out to 4 in the afternoon, listening to stories after stories. And you know what he say, man? Doc, I know you got to go, but let me tell you this one. And this one will end up being 30 more. What a time.
Quite a man. Time. I met him in the same manner. First time I met him in D.C., I stayed in his hotel room for 3 hours just listening and learning. And I'm sure you learned as much. That's why you're such an effective president now. You learn from the best.
Well, I even knew him when I was like 17, 18 years of age in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, man. He came down with Dick Gregory to First African Baptist Church. And I was in high school. And their job being delegated and responsibility to Dr. King was to come to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And we were integrating the movie theaters and the parks. And CT would teach us, man, book did he teach us? He would teach us the significance and importance of nonviolence. And we will play the roles of being nonviolent and not to get upset when they call you the N word and spat upon you and denigrate you like you less than a human being, and how we will ball up in a knot to protect our heads and the rest of our bodies. That came from Dr. C.T. Vivian and Dick Gregory and the other leaders, with the relationship of our local pastor, none other than Reverend Dr. T.Y. Rogers. What an experience. What a story that I tell to my grandchildren and all young folks whenever the opportunity presents itself.
There's still a homecoming today for the legend, Hank Aaron. But we're losing a lot of our history, are we not? 2020 took some of our guiding lights, our pioneers, the John Lewises, the C.T. Vivians, the Reverend, a lot of them are leaving us.
Dr. Joe Lowry.
Yes.
Those three, and to you and the staff, I want to commend you for recognizing Dr. Lowry, Congressman John Lewis, and Dr. C.T. Vivian with our magazine in telling their story. And people are just so elated over that. And it's a great keepsake. It's a great iconic magazine talking about our friends. Oh, thank you, sir. Mr. Eden, can you hold it up again? And hold it up at the bottom. There you go. Where the two, actually the three, received the Presidential Medal of Honor. Congressman John Lewis, Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowry, and none other than Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian. Thank you for having that magazine. What a tribute.
And to end the note, Hank Aaron won a Presidential Medal of Honor too.
Absolutely. And they are all in kinship and relationship with the SCLC. We don't have to wave no flag. We are an institution in our own right of the civil rights movement because of great leaders like Hank Aaron, Joseph Lowry, C.T. Vivian, and Congressman John Lewis.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's been our president and CEO, Dr. Charles Steele Jr. This has been SCLC TV. We'll see you next week.